Happy New Year, everyone, and welcome to our very first episode of 2025. I hope you've all had a restful break and are ready to dive into another exciting year together. Today, I am thrilled to kick things off by bringing back one of our most recognizable guests, Mr. Dan Fitzpatrick. You might know him from his best-selling work, The AI Classroom, and his ever-distinctive northern tones that instantly put educators at ease. Now, in this episode, Dan and I talk about his brand new book, Infinite Education, which launches tomorrow, January the 6th. We're going to explore how schools can harness AI and future-focused thinking to truly innovate, adapt, and evolve. Dan shares his 4-step strategy designed to help leaders and teachers scope out their goals, shape real change, influence school culture, and ultimately align the entire community around a more dynamic vision for learning. If you're looking for inspiration to start the new year with fresh ideas about where education could head next, you won't want to miss this conversation. Now, before we dive in, I want to highlight a special initiative I've recently launched, which is the list AI Changemakers by Deep. If you're an educator in the UAE using AI to spark creativity, enhance student engagement, or push the boundaries of traditional teaching, this is your chance to get recognized. We're celebrating the top 50 educators leading the way in AI-powered innovation, and applications are already open. Just head to deepprofessional.com to learn more and sign up. Now on to the episode. And we'll kick off. A man who needs no introduction here, I think whose face amongst teachers is very, very recognisable, who's very soft, Geordie-esque tones, is also very recognisable on a podcast. Mr. Dan Fitzpatrick, how are you today, sir?
Alex, it's good to see you, man. It's really good to see you, yeah. Interesting you say soft. I think when I'm talking to people who aren't from the northeast of England, I think it does like soften down a bit. But yeah, it gets a bit harsher when I get home.
Yeah, it's like me trying to say to people I'm from Birmingham, and then they go, no, you're not. And yet when I get around a few of my family members, I've worked very hard to do, like, it's like you probably go back into a bit of yams and babs, and my wife's the same from Yorkshire. She's exactly the same.
Did you just say you've worked really hard to get rid of the accent?
Yeah.
Do you really want to be admitting that? People back home not going to be a bit annoyed then?
Well, technically, I grew up in a very tiny village north of Birmingham, but I do have Birmingham descent. Right. So, yeah, this is a beautiful podcast, by the way, people. Just edit that part out. We shall see. Anyway, today we are here to talk about, well, we're going to say future, but technically it's past, because this is how the beauty of podcasting and these types of things work nowadays. But a very, very exciting adventure, a quest almost, I'm going to say, that you have put yourself on. How would you like to introduce that?
Are you talking about the book?
No, not the book at all.
All right.
Yes, the book.
I was like, what's going on? A quest? What have I done?
A quest.
Yes.
I was trying to build it up into a monumental journey of discovery and excitement and adventure.
Yeah, I suppose when I released the AI Classroom back in, when was it, March 2023, it was a very, very practical book for teachers in the classroom, and kind of introduced the topic for teachers. Now, a lot of teachers still need that, and I say that every day. Like, I'm in an amazingly privileged position where I get to travel around and work with schools, businesses, colleges, literally in a hotel in Brighton, because I'm working with some head teachers tomorrow. And I suppose a lot of teachers still need that kind of, what is it? What can I do with it? But increasingly, I've noticed that a lot of head teachers, a lot of leadership teams are thinking, well, what does this mean? What does this mean for the next few years if this technology is going to advance? So before I started my own business doing this, I used to work in leadership positions. So I worked as a director for innovation and digital for a large group of colleges. I worked for a secondary school in the UK on their leadership team looking after digital. And so I built some skills around strategic innovation and strategic integration. So I thought I started working with leaders quite early on to look at, well, how do you bring about strategic change within education, which as you will know, it's probably not the easiest task. I probably could have picked a much easier task to do. And I suppose I've always kind of had the mindset as well, ever since I started training to be a teacher, that we probably need to innovate a bit here within education. Some things change, but a lot doesn't and hasn't changed for a while. And I often question: are we preparing our young people for the actual world that's out there? Are we preparing them to be lifelong learners? Are we preparing them to be adaptable in that world? And so I thought, well, how do I work with leaders out there to actually look at that and go, well, how do we make substantial change rather than just small changes that still get to the same result? Now, what I mean by that is I tend to use as a three-box solution. I might have even mentioned it the first time I was on your show, where it's by a guy called Vijay Govindarajan, a business innovator, and he uses this three-box model where he says box one is all about kind of the performance engine of any business, any organization. So a school, it's the systems, the procedures in place that get to the result they want to get to, whether that be certain amount of A stars that year, certain amount of whatever that year, pass the regulatory framework, Ofsted, whatever that might be. And I think what we've done is we've approached AI firstly, and it's the obvious way really, to look at, well, how can we innovate on that journey? So how can we build in some efficiencies? How can we really help maybe get to those successes a bit faster and relieve a bit of pressure on the system? And my goodness, the education system needs that. But there's kind of an elephant in the room here, and that is that if AI does progress the way we think it's going to progress, then there could be some conflict there with the current system as well. And sometimes you hear this in terms of, well, how do we take AI with what the benefits, but mitigate against the risks? Now, there are some really solid risks that we need to mitigate against, but not everything's a risk when it comes to this technology. Some disruption is good and I think should be welcome. So how does a school system start to evolve so that it doesn't just innovate in a linear way in doing what it's always done, but a bit more efficiently, let's say, but actually starts to recreate how we need to prepare students for that world, for success, whatever the purpose of that school is. I mean, most schools kind of exist to prepare their students for success, whatever that looks like, but there has to be success in the actual world we live in. So I guess the innovative approach when it comes to strategy that I've kind of went down the road with is that second part. I think when we look at a lot of educational strategy, it's about the first part. It's about, well, how do we integrate this into the current system, and then plan it out and make sure that happens. But this book's very much about the second half of that, and how do we actually create a capacity within a school, a traditional school as well, to start thinking about non-linear innovation. And I've called it infinite education, the 4-step strategy for leading change in the age of artificial intelligence. And yeah, that term infinite education kind of sums up what I'm saying, really. It's kind of building on the work of James Carson in the 1980s when he talked about infinite and finite games. And I think we need to probably look at an infinite approach to education rather than the traditional finite approach.
Yeah, and that resonates with me. And you might be in the same position as well in terms of big fan of Simon Sinek. And obviously with the internet game, it talks a lot about very similar things, doesn't he? In terms of education is always traditionally seen as finite, isn't it? As in, like, it has an end point. And what resonates with me in this is with its infinite education is, well, actually the bricks and mortar potentially that exist, or once I leave my school, the education still goes on. Kids will still come in and kids will still learn. It's almost about, to some extent, the legacy that continues moving forward, as it were, once you have gone or once. And so I think it's a great concept to have. So you mentioned this 4-step method. Like, what are they? If you just kind of summarize it a little bit, if you break them down into its simplistic terms.
Yeah, it's like it's a playbook for how do you cultivate innovation, essentially. So it's not like, and I was thinking of this today because I think I was saying to you before we went live, I went and found a cafe in Brighton, and I'm trying to write the last chapter at the minute, and really and I kept thinking, why is this different? Why is this? And I think a lot of educational strategy books that I've read kind of come at it from the point of view as well, almost like how to write a document. Like this, it needs to have these 5 things included: your infrastructure, it needs to have your safeguard, and it needs to have your accessibility, and it's almost like how to write a nice document about whatever you're doing. And I think that's important. I do think that's important. But I suppose what I'm trying to do is to rewind, is almost to go back even before that and go, right, well, so the 4 steps are scope, shape, influence, and alignment. And the whole idea is it's trying to show educators how people in innovative businesses recreate their industries. And I remember being told this. I had an amazing leadership mentor when I was working in colleges, a guy who had a business background, and he taught me so much and gave me so much insight into how to make real change within a large organization. And so the scope element of this is, well, how do we effectively understand our position internally and our position within the external world? So it's gathering evidence, it's triangulating evidence, it's knowing what capabilities are already in the existing organization, what might we need to do, how do we reflect, so in the book, it's a bunch of strategies, a bunch of activities even. So every time, the second half of the book is very practical. And it's all about what do you do with I call it an accelerator group. So pulling together an accelerator group, what are you going to do with them? And it's a series of tasks, activities around how do you look outwards? How do you truly assess where you are and start to think about where you need to be? The shape bit is that kind of building on that and going, right, well, how do we want to shape our future? So I use techniques such as speculative thinking. So where you kind of a branch of design thinking where you imagine yourself 5, 10, 15 years time, and you take a topic like, let's say, AI in education and go, well, what does that look like in 5 years' time? And you split off into groups. One group does the 5 years, one group does the 10 years, one group does the 15 years, and you go, right, what does it look like? What is the device that the students got that's enabling them to learn with AI? And almost just imagine it. What could it be? And then you prototype it. There's a part where you create an artifact. You actually literally create that device, or you create a model of that classroom, whatever it's going to be. And in the book, I really advocate for the fact that this things like that shouldn't just be with the accelerator group. Get the kids to do that. Get the students to do that. Like, showcase it. Get them thinking about this, and then get your parents, your local businesses in to a showcase where they can offer their feedback. And so it's really about, I suppose it's about putting yourself into the next few years and going, right, what is possible, and then starting to shape that vision. And then looking at how do we reverse engineer that. The next one is, and this is kind of the first 2 are kind of in their own category. The second 2 are in a different category. So I think a lot of organizations, in my experience, kind of do the scope and the shape all right. If they're coming up with a strategy, they'll spend some time, do some development days, strategy days. They get to the end of the shape, and then they move straight to a plan. Right, well, how do we plan this out? What happens in year 1? What happens in year 2? What happens in year 3? And so on. Then it goes into a nice PDF. The marketing department mock it up to get all the branding, goes on the website, it's communicated to governors, it's communicated to parents, and then they begin trying to work towards that. And I think a lot of strategies fail, especially in an ecosystem like a school, which is so entrenched in traditional ways of doing things and doesn't have the time in a lot of cases to look at how we do something differently. It kind of dies on the vine at that point. Some things get done, some of the boxes get ticked, but have we really made sustainable and lasting change? Well, looking at the education systems as a whole, we haven't really. I mean, there's dynamic and innovative individual schools and individuals within those schools, but has it really caught on? Has it influenced the rest of the system? I'm not seeing all that much evidence of that. So the second part is, well, how do you bring the people along with you, which I think is probably more important than the first half. So step 3 is influence. How do you influence? And this is something I learned later on. This was, again, when I was in college education. I had a deep, fast learning curve from my mentor and working within a executive team of how do you actually influence certain individuals within an organization? Who do you need to influence? And this is not influences in kind of a manipulative way. I think sometimes that can be the mindset with this. It's more, how do you influence so you can, and I guess, again, we were talking off air, weren't we, about how do you get the message out about the good work you're doing and show people it. And it's that really. But it's internally. How do you, within the internal structures of your organization, get people hooked on this new strategy? How do you get them excited, want to be involved? Also, there's a whole other section of how do you speak to the executives within your organization? How do you break it down for them? So it's very practical on that level. And then the last bit, which I'm writing at the moment, or trying to polish at the moment, is alignment. So once you've influenced key individuals, once you've sparked some passion within your organization and some movement towards the strategic goals, how do you bring everyone along with you? How do you bring everyone into alignment? And I share some strategies from a great book called Liberating Structures, again, which is kind of built on design thinking around how do you keep a flow of alignment going through your organization where you're continually deconstructing what's gone before, coming up with renewed ideas, birthing them, bringing them to maturity, and then going around again. So there's that, and again, it's very much like introduction of the concepts or the activities, and then a plan. And I'm also, to accompany that second half of the book, there's like a practical, what's it called, like activity book that I'm putting together where leaders or innovators in an organization can literally like write in it and do the activities with their group. So yeah, that's the 4 steps. So it's not a plan, and I think this is really probably important to iterate. And you've probably seen me on social media get a bit annoyed about this, but I really think we need to separate the idea that strategy is a plan, because they're 2 very different things. Now, once your strategy is in place, a plan needs to take place in order to then carry out the strategy. But a strategy is a very different thing. So it's not a book where someone's going to pick it up and it's going to say, it's going to be a planned out, this is how to write your strategy. It's actually, the book puts the onus back onto the organization to come up with the ideas for their own strategy, if that makes sense.
Very much so. And I'll give you an example from what happened with me today. So Ava, we're coming back from school later today. Ava had a netball fixture and she's playing away. And she plays in defence. And she was saying, oh, this goal attack in the 4th quarter, Dad. She was just really physical, just really elbow in. And she was like, the girls were like, just elbow back, fight fire with fire. And I kind of, very much from a sporting background, always think about strategy and tactics. And it's like, you kind of go into that dad mode, don't you? It's like, darling, like fire with fire, Gandhi. Into the Gandhi mode, no, fire with fire, no, it's like hate with hate type of thing. But you kind of go into that, you've got to pick the right tactic for it. Sometimes that works, other times it's like, kill people with kindness. A strategy is just an approach, or, that has to be adaptable and has to be flexible, so that you kind of go, look, this is what we want to get to. However, along that pathway, this might happen and I need to pivot or go. And so, it's being prepared for those types of things that happen. And so I'm trying to explain that to her in terms of tactics. Like, you talk a lot about tactics, inner tactics, tactics within individuals, and tactics within a group in terms of how you perform and what you're trying to achieve. And obviously it changes. So the strategy part, I get, and that's one of the things for me as a leader, I probably find the most difficult is strategic planning, in terms of going, I want to get from A to B, but what are all the bits that fit in the middle? And therefore, how do I adapt or pivot or flex or whatever needs to happen to ensure that I can still get there? And I think what you're saying at the moment in time is like, people just want that yellow brick road. People just want, hey, get me from A to B, tell me what to do, put me in the Uber with the fluffy cushions and we'll be golden. And the reality is, it's not like that. I mean, I read a really interesting part the other day. And it just said, hey, 2 years ago, because we're near enough 2 years ago, 2022, November, ChatGPT came along and everyone went, hey, it's going to change how you work. And the question was this: how has AI changed the way you work? And I think that's a really important question for us to ask, because like you're saying, a lot of these educators in schools, have they changed? Are they really changing the approach? And, I see a snippet and you see a lot more than I do. I think the reality is, no, it hasn't. Like, I might plan slightly differently. I might do and utilize things, a bit more. But the reality is, I think education at the moment in a lot of things is still the same and still doing the same things. Does that make it right? That's the real question, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. And I think I want to jump into that, but just to come back to what you were saying about having that strategy, I think you're spot on there. I think it's good to have this is the plan for how we're going to get there, but it shouldn't be like, you go into some organizations and go, right, show me what the strategy is, and it's just a big pile of paperwork. I'd argue that a strategy could be on one side of A4 paper. And my analogy is, when I speak in public, so it's kind of 80% of my work at the moment, and I see it because I get invited to conferences or events where I see other people speaking as well, and it doesn't happen that often, but you still, someone might be a bit inexperienced, and so step up with like a literally written out script, and I don't think I've ever in that scenario come across somebody who's got a written out script where it goes well, because any little thing that goes off track, anything where they jump to page 3 instead of page 2 by accident, or the microphone stops working and then they've got to find out the position where they were at, there's no room for flexibility there. And so things, when they go wrong, seem a lot bigger than they are, because it's like, well, where do we go? And I try to have the approach, not that it's the perfect approach in any means, but I just try to have the approach of, right, within a talk, I've got, let's say, 5 main points I want to touch on. I want them in that order. And then I can allow myself to go off course. I can allow myself to ad lib, see what happens. But I know that very soon I need to get to that point. And then once I've got to that point, I can kind of veer off as well again and see what works, what doesn't work, and see. And I used to be a stand-up comedian. And so I really like, this is before I was a teacher, so I really like, when I'm public speaking, just seeing what happens sometimes, and sometimes just not applying the filter and seeing where it goes. But I think there's the freedom of that, because I know I've got those touch points coming up. And so if I veer off track, if I try to say something funny and it doesn't get a laugh, whatever happens, I know I can come back to that point, and that point's a good point, and it's going to anchor everybody back in to the main thing of what we're doing and what we're trying to achieve. And I think a strategy's almost got to be like that as well, where you know where the anchor points are going to be, you know where the end point is going to be, but it'll allow some freedom to venture off and try something. And I think that's where things get tricky, because you've got to allow for failure. Like, you've got to, like, when I veer off topic and try to make a joke with somebody in the audience, and I just don't get a laugh and it's really awkward, I'm able to go, which happens quite often. I'm able to go, right, that didn't work. I'll not do that again. but I'm able to learn from that and move on. I mean, hopefully I learn from it. Probably not all the time, but I think on a organizational level, we need to have that freedom to be able to try something out. It doesn't work, but it's okay because we're still on track. We've still got those anchor points. Yeah, it is. It's tough that though, because in order to achieve that, you kind of need to have that alignment. Everybody needs to know, be in safe hands, that you're on a journey together. And I think what causes the problem is when you've got an innovator in an organization or a leader who's trying something different, is trying to bring people along with them, is not really succeeding, and then they fail at something, then the rest of the organization goes, well, there you go, told you, it's not going to work. And then it's just an extra bit of armor then that is just used to stop people from wanting to change. And so I think, and I suppose that's why I've got the 4 steps, and the last step being alignment, because you need to get that alignment in a healthy position, because then, so that when you do fail, everybody's like, well, it's okay, we're still in safe hands, we're still on that journey, we're still moving towards that end goal together. Yeah, I know there was something else I was going to address on what you said, but I knew I'd forget it, and I have.
It's absolutely fine. All I was thinking of when you were talking about that is the Mike Tyson thing. Everyone's got a plan until they get punched in the face. And it's that, isn't it? Because that's sometimes what it feels like in school. It's hard. Teaching is hard. And for all the best laid plans and ideas and everything you want to do, like, things can go wrong. And it's important that you've got a leadership team that supports that. It's important that you've got individuals around you, and even kids, students. I think the best times and lessons I have is when I say to kids, right, guys, we're going to trial this. Like, for example, I'm using a platform with my year 8s at the moment, doing a bit of research. And they're like, so we're the only class in the school using this? It's like, yeah. And they're like, so like we're like the guinea pigs of it. And you know, they might be like, oh, is that a good thing? And they're like, oh yeah, this is great. And it's like, and so you get, like, we're talking about alignment and, you know, almost this influence. It's not just the stakeholders and the leadership down. It's also from the students up. And I think that's really, really important in this, isn't it?
100%. And I make that argument in the book that actually, if you do this with students as well, then imagine being a student in that school, like, and what they're going to indirectly and directly learn from innovation, failure, what they're going to learn from how to actually be creative in the world, and if they say that as a norm, that sometimes things go pear-shaped, but the culture in the place, the strategy set, the alignment is there, that where we can be honest and go, right, that didn't work, let's move on. And like you say there, like, certain teachers like yourself are doing it amazingly, and it's how do we get the organization to be able to do that and go, like, imagine I think it's a fear of failure. Like, you see, I remember a few years ago when, and there's still a few of them around, but technical colleges started to become a big thing in the UK. So a different type of school that would focus on the vocational. And there's still some. There's one in Newcastle where I live, and it seems to be fairly successful. But a lot of them in those first few years failed and had to shut down. And I saw a lot of people in kind of traditional forms of education almost snigger at that and go, well, there we go, that didn't work. And I'm like, at least they tried. At least they tried something different. At least they're trying to innovate and prepare students better for the future. And I see that a lot at the minute. I just did an interview with a journalist the other day about, I thought it was kind of an old story now, but I think they wanted to look at it, about the school I think it's in London, that are using AI to teach students. And the start of the term, they got a lot of media attention. And I'm like, I don't know if it's the right thing to do. I think it's a lot more sensationalized than it actually is, because they still have a lot of human contact. They're essentially just doing some of their learning through an automated system, I guess. I'm like, so I don't know if it's going to work. I've got no idea if it's going to work or if that's going to be the future of education. I'm guessing probably not. We're probably going to need to be a bit more dynamic than that. But But my attitude is, at least they're trying something different. At least they're testing it out. And I know if let's say that approach fails, and this time next year that school are having to say, right, we're scrapping that. There's going to be so many people gloating. There's going to be so many people going, look, told you AI isn't the answer. And I'm like, and I just feel like we need to have those failures. We need to, and at least there's people trying to try new things. And if they fail, maybe they'll then move on to something else, which is a bit more refined. And I think, imagine being in a school as a student where that is the culture. I think the students are going to learn a lot more that's going to help them be successful in the real world than if they're in a super safe school that is just doing super safe methodologies.
Yeah. Because once they get out and go to university or go for the first job interview, and it's like, oh, I didn't get it. What? This is not what life's meant to be like. And yeah, life's not fair, and things are hard. And the reality is,
it's happening, isn't it? Like, people are leaving. I was reading a story the other day about someone who went to university, got 2-1, did everything right throughout their whole school career. So from being 4 years old to 22, so 18 years of their life, done everything, ticked every box, got the highest grades they could possibly get, and then tried to get a job and couldn't get a job. And it's almost like, and you almost feel for them because you're like, they've done everything that the system has asked of them, and yet they're still woefully unprepared for life. Crazy. It's crazy.
And that must be, and it's the next one. It's like all these things we're talking about that we're not trying to break down traditional education, but we are looking at, like, there's cracks and there's things that we know that we want to do better, that we can do better. And we're looking at it for the right reasons so that students can. That's always, for me, is the key thing. But I imagine when you were writing the book that there must have been times when, you're challenging some very deeply ingrained systems here. Like, were there any moments where you were questioning, like, hey, is this possible?
Yeah, there is. And I think one of the, because I'm kind of doing different rounds of edits on it, and one of the latest rounds of edits, I looked through just thinking, and the question I had in the back of my mind was, is this realistic? And I think that's kind of what I was looking at and thinking, putting my mind back into being a teacher in secondary schools. Is this realistic? Some of it isn't. So some of it isn't like traditionally realistic. But if you build the foundations as the book suggests, then maybe in the next few months, in the next few years, you might be able to do some of the more radical things. And I think, like you say, you don't have to. This is not about changing the system. In fact, I talk about building on the work of liberating structures, talk about 3 different types of leaders. And so in a place where kind of what we do is reach maturity, we have managers as leaders. And I think that's kind of where we're at in a lot. And it's a big generalization, but I think a lot of the education system is reached a maturity level where the best type of leadership is a manager leader. But if we don't look beyond that, we're not going to see other possibilities. And the different types of leadership are, which is kind of what my book is directed towards, is the heretical leader, the heretic. So somebody who's going to question the orthodoxy, someone who's going to go, right, actually, could there be another way? Is everything that we've been taught to is the only way? Is that really the right way? And then so the heretic begins a journey of creative destruction, starting to break things down. And then coming from that, you need a leader who's going to be a networker, who's then going to bring people together and foster ideas, who's going to bring people together and look for innovation, create innovation. You go from that into the birth stage where you need an entrepreneur, someone who's actually got the skills to bring that to life. And then you get to the mature stage again. But we need to keep going around. And every time we go around, and it's an infinity shape, which is nice because it fits in with the theme of the book as well. And every time you go around, it's not about giving up everything from the maturity stage. It's about giving up the things that don't fit in with the purpose anymore of the school. Now, 90%, 50%, whatever it might be, might still fit in with that purpose and still be doing its job, but it's about creatively destructing the stuff that doesn't align with the purpose anymore. But in order to do that, we need those 4 different types of leaders. And I think traditionally we've kind of, and again, as someone who's been on leadership teams, we've fostered managerial leaders. And we've kind of neglected the entrepreneur, the networker, and the heretic. And I think we need to. And again, that's when I talk about forming this accelerator group in the book. Actually, one of the dual purposes of that group is to raise those types of leaders as well, as to raise the heretics, raise the entrepreneurs, and then incorporate them within the leadership team as well.
Every time you say the word heretic, I just think of Halo. I don't know if you've ever played that game, but the heretics in that, and even Warhammer, was it the newest Warhammer game that's come out called Heretics? Oh, it's fascinating that in terms of leadership, like that part. I had a misspent youth at university, obviously. So here's an interesting one, because I like books. Let's think about books. You've got digital tools. You've got me sat here who loves digital content, making, videos and podcasts and digital streaming, AI platforms. Like, why write a book? Like, do books still hold the same power that they used to?
It's interesting. I think they do. I'm completely with you, because it almost doesn't make sense for them to. But I think people still, again, I suppose it's a bit like what we were just talking about, that innovation happens, but actually stuff that still works doesn't have to be let go of. And I think not for everybody, but I think books still work for a large group of people. I think probably because I suppose I'll share a story. So over the summer, I decided to pull together, I think, 5 or 6 articles that I'd written for Forbes, and that really fit in, and with like a theme of how do you start the new year off, wanting to grapple with AI. And I thought, what, I'm going to put them together in one PDF, write an introduction, and then put it out there for free. So I put it on my website as a PDF and going, if you're looking to get into AI, here's some articles. And I got loads of people messaging me saying, can this be printed? Can I have this like in a book format? Because I'd love to just have it as like a little manual. And so I put it on Amazon as just a cost price, mainly because that was the cheapest way to get it printed, really. So there was still a desire there for people to want to have something physical in their hand and be able to flick through it and put notes in and so on. So I think, I think people still want something like that. And I don't know about you, but I go through periods of liking a book, and then I'll switch to listening to audiobooks for a few months, and then I'll download a Kindle book, and then for someone who writes books, I have a bit of a love-hate relationship with books, but mainly because I'm getting older. I don't know about you, but I'm very difficult to read. I'm like, I read a few pages of a book and I start getting tired, and maybe it's because I've got 2 toddlers at home. I just find myself falling asleep when I try to read these days.
Yes. Yeah. I just don't read. Because I think my obviously teaching jobs is spent so long reading. You're reading books or like digital stuff around or on phones. Like I've never really read for pleasure. Like I've always read for learning. If I'm reading something, it's because I want to take something from it. To the point where even now,
really?
like again, digital. I've got Audible, and I will listen to books on Audible in the car. And how bad's this?
Yeah,
I won't listen to them at normal speed. I'll do it 1.5 times. Because I can, because I'm like, I'm just listening to it, and I want to get through it as quick as possible while still maintaining that. So it's I'm listening to a few at the moment. It's like 1.5 go, because from driving to Abu Dhabi, it's like an hour, or around Dubai, it could be 20, 25 minutes, and I'll just drip in, drip out. And if that, I just listen to a podcast. It's super, it's interesting, and everyone's slightly different in terms of where they consume, where they want to get that information from. But yeah, I think, as I say, there was an article in the news, I think it was yesterday or today, and it was one of the bookstores, I can't remember what it was called, but it was doing like record breaking figures because more and more people are going back to traditional bookstores and wanting to have sort of physical books. So there's obviously still a place for it. I think there's very much still a place for it. So, but it's
interesting because I know I noticed online today you're starting to do, like, is it the Notebook LM podcast versions of you? And I've started using Notebook LM to digest content a lot recently. So I'll just stick it all in, especially if I want to learn about something new. I'll find as much as I can, put it into Notebook LM, and then just have a conversation with it and ask it questions. So it feels like it's just a bit more dynamic to be able to ask it questions. And then if it's something that it's quite complex, and if I read it, I don't fully understand it, what I'll do is I'll create a little podcast about it using Notebook LM, and then I'll put it on in the car, or I'll do a bit of work and just have it on my phone playing in the background, and then it helps me break into the content a bit, start to understand it, and then I can go back and read it, and then get a lot more from it. So yeah, I think how I consume that type of content is so dynamic at the moment, and it's very fluid.
I mean, I did it, and again, I always listen to myself back. I always listen to the podcasts I make because I'm one of those sort of, I want to make sure the quality's there. But also, when you're doing it, and you know this, I don't take on board anything. I'm not learning from this conversation per se, because I'm more interested, like, is everything right? Am I asking questions? And so I have to come back to it afterwards and then re-listen and go, and sometimes go, that was a really good conversation. Or it's like, you can get that information from it. And so I listened back to the Notebook LM stuff today. It's like 8 minutes. And it was literally the transcript from the most recent podcast. And it was really good. It was like just, the man and the woman talking, and it was, this came with interesting points. So it's like, you can do that. If you've not got 45 minutes, like, here you go, there's 8 minutes, and it will summarize those points for you. So yeah, I mean, we look forward to the audio version of the Infinite. So,
yeah, actually, well, saying that, I've actually, so my weekly article that goes out, I've started putting it out as a podcast, and I use 11 Labs. So I don't actually read it myself. I've trained an AI on my voice, and it's amazing. It's my voice, but it pronounces things much better than I do. It's really good. So I just put my article into it. It reads out my full article in my voice, and that's my podcast every week. And it's like I put like a 10-minute podcast out every week, and I've literally, from someone I've done podcasting for, I think I first started doing podcasting in 2008. So for someone who's done podcasting that long, like, to be able to just do this and it'd be done in like 2 minutes, I'm like, this is amazing. I mean, it's obviously, it's not going to be for everyone, and a lot of podcasts are a lot more dynamic than someone just reading an article out. But at the moment, it's really working, saving me so much time, and some people are listening to it as well, which is always a bonus.
Well, that's the thing, isn't it? People want it. It's like, again, put it in the car, put it in the gym, put it on this. Some people prefer to listen and do, and I get it. I think it's, for us, for you as well, like, who are trying to upskill and educate and help teachers move forward. It's like, you got to look at how many different formats can I give, because not everyone, being the teachers that we are, we kind of go, not everyone wants to learn in the same way. How can we adapt? How can we, let's go with this. How can we adapt our strategies to ensure that everyone gets the same value out of the content we produce?
Yeah, that's interesting. Or even how can we help our students to be able to take the content and adapt it into how they want to use it? And it's interesting. I don't know if you've come across the AI tool Diffit, but you essentially you put a bit of content in, and it'll turn it into lots of resources for a lesson. It's pretty good. And I was doing some sessions with some teachers a few months ago, and one of the teachers was like, "Oh, my daughter uses this." And I was like, "Oh, is she a teacher?" And she was like, "Oh no, she's like 14 years old." And I could, and like at first I was like, what? Why is she creating lesson resources? But then she was like, no, her daughter will take a resource out from her lesson, and she will, if she's doing homework or revision, she will put it into Diffit, and because Diffit kind of spits it out into questions, into adapted content and so on, she's then using that to learn. And I suppose there's probably not much difference there into how we would just describe in Notebook LM. So I think if we can give our students those skills to be dynamic with content as well, and I suppose that's infinite education really in a nutshell, if we can pass on those skills.
Raising the village, as it were. Last question I've got for you then, because we're kind of pushed for time, and it's this. So if someone reads this book and applies the ideas that you're proposing, what's the transformation that you hope to see in them, in their classrooms and in their schools?
Yeah, the strategies in the book are already being done by certain schools that I've worked with, and from schools that I've learned from. So some schools are already doing this, and they're starting to rethink how they do education. So I'm talking about how their students learn, how their students do assessment, how they apply their knowledge, how their schedules and their day look. It should empower a school to start thinking about things that break the mold and things that they've never done before. Now, I'm well aware that a lot of schools exist within a structure or an education system where that's going to cause a lot of tension, where that's going to not really fit in with what Ofsted are looking for or what the exam system is looking for. But some schools are doing it and still fitting in with it as well, like as a midway point. So, I mean, it's not a school that I've worked with, but an example of one in the UK, XP schools. XP don't have traditional lessons. What they do is they do what they call expeditions, where a bunch of teachers who are multidisciplinary will come together, design an expedition that will incorporate parts of the curriculum from all different subjects, and then their students will do essentially like a project, really, but they always make sure that project has real world impact as well. So whether it'll be for like local homeless communities, whether it'll be at the end they all pool their resources and create and publish a book, whatever it might be. So, and they were rated outstanding by Ofsted. They're in the first schools in Doncaster. They've got a few more now. They get really decent exam results. So there is a way to do radical change within the system. Personally, I think the system needs to change as well, in order to really get radical. I think I worry because sometimes I think I don't know if we're going to get there, especially in terms of state education. I think sometimes the pressures are too much, but we will see, I think, lots of competition appearing, and we're already starting to see in alternative forms of school. So maybe if the book inspires some schools to take different routes, non-traditional routes, maybe. I see a lot in America. I've worked with a few charter schools in the United States, and charter schools are given a bit more freedom than state schools, but a lot of them are setting up online versions of the school, and which is becoming quite common now, and just trying new things. I was working with one in Sacramento in California a few months ago, and they've just secured the funding to buy a Tesla Optimus robot for their school. So that's going to be interesting. So they're really kind of pushing the boat out on what this might look like within education. But I think what it should do is it should allow the school to come together and go, right, how do we fulfill our purpose? And what might we need to give up? What might we need to relook at? What might we need to creatively deconstruct? And how can we keep that course of renewal?
And that wraps up our first episode of the new year. I hope Dan's insights have given you plenty of food for thought and a spark of inspiration as we all head into 2025. Remember, you can grab his new book, Infinite Education, from tomorrow, January the 6th, on Amazon and any other major online bookstores. Keep an eye on Dan's social media channels for direct links and updates. And as always, thank you for listening. And here's to a year full of growth, innovation, and endless learning. Until next time, take care.